I'm going to stop you right there. My director didn't even look at the folder in my hands. He folded his arms, leaned back in his chair, and said it like he was ordering coffee. This promotion isn't happening. The words landed like a slap across my face. Public. Final. Cold. I stood there in the doorway of his office, frozen, my carefully prepared documents suddenly feeling heavy and useless. I'd rehearsed this conversation 3 times that morning. I'd laid out every metric, every project success, every reason why I'd earned this step up. But none of that mattered now. His expression was blank, almost bored, like he'd already moved on to his next meeting before I'd even processed what he'd said. My throat tightened. I realized HR was already on the call. Their little square face sat in the corner of his monitor, watching everything unfold. This wasn't a discussion. It was an execution. And I was the last one to know it had been scheduled. HR cleared her throat through the speaker. The sound crackled in the silence. My director smiled, just slightly, like this was routine business. Like crushing someone's career progression was just another Tuesday task to check off his list. I felt my face heat up, that awful burning sensation that starts behind your ears and spreads down your neck. But I didn't speak. I didn't defend myself or ask why or beg him to reconsider. My fingers tightened around the folder he never opened, the edges digging into my palm. Every cell in my body screamed to say something, anything, to fight back or demand an explanation. But something deeper told me to stay quiet, to watch, to remember every single detail of this moment. He adjusted his tie and glanced at his watch. Then he said it, smooth as silk, with that practiced corporate voice he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. Let's all stay professional about this. He told them I was not quite ready. The words came out so easily, so confidently, like they were facts instead of lies. I stared at him, completely stunned, because he'd said the exact opposite to me just 2 days ago. We'd been standing by the printer, and he'd clapped me on the shoulder like we were old friends. This role already has your name on it, he'd said with a grin. Just a formality at this point. Now he sat there, looking HR in the eye through that webcam, and rewrote history like it was nothing. Like I hadn't spent the last 18 months carrying his department on my back. Like every late night and weekend hadn't happened. HR asked if I disagreed with his assessment. Her voice was careful, measured, walking that line between protocol and discomfort. The question hung in the air. All eyes turned to me. I said nothing. Not a single word. Not because I agreed with anything he just said, but because I finally understood something crucial. This wasn't a meeting. This was theater. The decision had been made long before I walked into his office with my folder full of proof. They'd already discussed it, already aligned their stories, already decided my fate without me in the room. Speaking now wouldn't change anything. It would only give them ammunition, words they could twist and use against me later. So I stood there, silent and still, watching my director's face for any crack in his mask. HR shuffled papers on her end. My director cleared his throat. The meeting ended in under 5 minutes. He dismissed me with a nod, already reaching for his phone before I'd even turned around. I walked out, folder still unopened, and closed his door quietly behind me. My director blocked my promotion request. 1 month later he was fired. But I didn't know that yet. Right then, walking down that hallway past colleagues who glanced up and then quickly looked away, I only knew that something fundamental had shifted. The floor felt different under my feet. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher. I walked back to my desk like nothing had happened, my face carefully neutral, my steps measured and calm. People were watching. They always watched when someone came back from a closed-door meeting with management. I could feel their eyes following me, their curiosity barely hidden behind computer screens and coffee cups. I set the folder down on my desk, perfectly aligned with the edge. I sat down. I opened my email, and I started working just like any other day. But inside something had crystallized. A decision I didn't even know I was making had already been made. My name is Salome Harris. And until that moment, standing in my director's office being dismissed like I was nobody, I'd actually believed that loyalty counted for something. I'd believed that hard work mattered, that results spoke for themselves, that doing the right thing would eventually be recognized and rewarded. Naive maybe, but I'd seen it work for others. I'd watched people get promoted for doing less. I'd seen mediocrity rewarded with corner offices and salary bumps. So why not me? I'd been with the company for 4 years. 4 years of arriving early and leaving late. 4 years of saying yes to every impossible deadline, every weekend emergency, every last-minute crisis that needed fixing. I remembered every late night I'd covered for him when he was working remotely, but really wasn't working at all. Every report I'd polished when his writing fell apart. Every client call I'd salvaged when he fumbled the details. And this was my reward. 2 weeks earlier he'd said something different. We'd been in the break room, waiting for the coffee machine to finish its slow, gurgling process. Just the two of us. He'd been in a good mood, relaxed, almost friendly. "You know that senior analyst position that's opening up?" he'd said casually, like he was commenting on the weather. I'd nodded, trying not to seem too eager, even though my heart had jumped. "This role already has your name on it," he'd continued. He'd smiled at me, that big confident smile he used in client presentations. "Just needs to go through the formal process, but it's basically done. You've more than earned it." I thanked him probably too many times. I'd gone home that night and told my partner. We talked about what the raise would mean, how we could finally start saving properly, maybe even think about buying a place. I replayed his exact words now, sitting at my desk. Every syllable, every pause, wondering which version was the lie. By Friday, 3 days after that closed-door execution, I found out who actually got the promotion. His name was Kyle. He'd been with the company for 11 months. Less than a year. He had good presentation skills, I'd give him that. Confident speaker. Nice smile. But experience. Technical knowledge. The ability to actually do the work instead of just talking about it. Not so much. I trained him on half our systems. I'd walked him through processes he still couldn't do without asking questions. And now he was my senior. Kyle stopped by my desk that afternoon, looking uncomfortable. He started to say something about how he hoped we could still work together, how he valued my expertise. I cut him off politely, told him congratulations, turned back to my screen. It wasn't his fault. Not really. But I realized something important in that moment. This wasn't about performance. It never had been. Kyle fit the picture my director wanted. Easier to manage. Closer to him. Less likely to push back. The emails started changing almost immediately. Threads I used to be copied on just stopped including my name. Decisions I used to make were quietly reassigned without announcement or explanation. Suddenly Kyle was CC'd on everything, and I was left off. In meetings, questions that used to come to me got directed to Kyle instead, even though he'd just look at me for the answer anyway. My director would nod and smile like Kyle was the one who'd figured it out. It was subtle at first. Easy to dismiss as coincidence or oversight. But it formed a pattern quickly. I was being phased out, made invisible, erased from conversations I'd been central to for years. Yet somehow the actual work still landed on my desk. The complex analysis. The data nobody else knew how to pull. The reports with tight deadlines and zero margin for error. Oh mine. So I was good enough to do the work, just not good enough to get credit for it. Not good enough to be promoted. But definitely good enough to clean up everyone else's mistakes. 2 weeks after the promotion announcement, I noticed something strange. My director submitted a quarterly performance report to leadership, and something about the numbers looked off. Not wildly wrong but off. Like they didn't quite match what I remembered from the source data. I pulled up the original files just to compare. My stomach dropped. The numbers were different. Not by massive amounts, but enough to paint a rosier picture than reality. Key metrics were inflated. Problem areas were minimized. Failures were reframed as learning opportunities with positive outcomes. It was subtle, the kind of thing most people would never catch unless they'd lived inside the data like I had. I stared at my screen, trying to process what I was looking at. Maybe it was an honest mistake. Maybe he'd pulled from an earlier draft or mixed up his sources. I double-checked everything, comparing line by line. No mistake. This was deliberate, calculated, and I was the only one who would know. It happened again the next month. And the month after that. Same pattern, different reports. Numbers massaged just enough to make his department look better than it was. Timelines adjusted to hide delays. Costs shifted to make budgets appear under control. Each time I went back to the source files hoping I was wrong. Each time the discrepancies were there, clear as day. This wasn't sloppy work. It wasn't a one-time error. It was habitual, systematic, a pattern of behavior that had probably been going on long before I'd noticed. And suddenly other things started making sense. The times he'd asked me to adjust the presentation of certain findings. The way he'd edit my reports before sending them up the chain. The projects that looked successful in his summaries but had actually been disasters behind the scenes. He'd been doing this for a while. And he'd been using people like me to cover his tracks, to do the real work while he manipulated the story for leadership. Then came the message that changed everything. Late on a Thursday afternoon, my chat window popped up with his name. "Hey Salome, can you clean this up before leadership sees it tomorrow? Just need the usual polish." Attached was a draft report. I opened it, already knowing what I'd find. Same issues. Inflated results. Convenient omissions. Creative interpretation of what had actually happened on a project that had gone sideways. Usually I would have jumped on this immediately. Fixed the problems, smoothed out the rough edges, made him look good like I always did. It was part of my unspoken job description. But this time I stared at that message for a long time. I thought about that promotion I didn't get. About Kyle sitting in the office that should have been mine. About being erased from email chains while still being expected to do all the work. For the first time in 4 years I didn't rush. Waited. Thought carefully. And I started typing a very different response than he expected. "Sure, happy to help. Can you clarify which specific sections need attention? Want to make sure I'm focusing on the right areas." Kept it polite, professional, helpful sounding. But I was doing something I'd never done before. I was asking him to be specific in writing. To state exactly what he wanted me to change and why. To create a paper trail. The message showed as read immediately. Then nothing. 5 minutes passed. 10. 20. Usually he'd respond right away when he needed something. He'd send rapid-fire messages with instructions, expectations, deadlines. But now silence. An hour went by. I kept working on other things, checking my chat window periodically. Nothing. He didn't reply for hours. Not until the next morning actually, and when he did, it was different. Vague. "Never mind, I'll handle it myself. Thanks, anyway." Something had shifted. He'd realized what I was doing. That I wasn't going to be his invisible editor anymore, cleaning up his lies without documentation. The game had changed, and he knew it. 2 days later, leadership asked me directly for clarification on some figures in his latest report. The email came from the VP of Operations, someone 3 levels above my director. It was polite but pointed. "Salome, I'm seeing some inconsistencies between this summary and the data from Q2. Can you help me understand the methodology here?" I read that email 5 times. This was a moment. Voice. I could do what I'd always done, smooth things over, make excuses, protect my director even though he'd thrown me under the bus. Or I could do something different. I opened the original data files. I attached them to my response. And I sent them to the VP with a simple note. "Here are the source files from our system. Let me know if you need anything else." Nothing else. No explanation. No commentary. No interpretation. Just the facts. The raw numbers that told the real story. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I closed my laptop and went to lunch, my hands shaking slightly. The tension started the next morning. My director cornered me after the weekly team meeting, in that small hallway between the conference room and the elevators where conversations always felt slightly trapped. His voice was low. Controlled but barely. That data you sent to operations, he said, not quite looking at me. That was incomplete context. Made things look worse than they are. I met his eyes. Teddy. I sent what they asked for. The source files. He stepped closer, lowering his voice even more. You could have checked with me first. We're supposed to be a team here, Salome. That's how this works. There it was. The same word he'd used in that meeting when he blocked my promotion. Professional. All those corporate words that meant, do what I say and don't ask questions. He asked why I didn't help him out like I used to. Like helping meant covering up his lies. Like being a team player meant being complicit. I looked at him directly, my voice quieter than his but somehow steadier. I assumed accuracy mattered. 5 words. That's all I said. But we both heard everything underneath them. I assumed leadership wanted the truth. I assumed we weren't supposed to manipulate data. I assumed integrity was important. His smile appeared, but it didn't reach his eyes. That corporate smile that was really a warning. Of course it does, he said, each word careful. I just think there are better ways to present information. More collaborative ways. He emphasized that last word like it was a threat and a promise. Like I'd broken some unspoken rule by being honest. Like accuracy was negotiable if it made him look bad. We stood there for a moment, the air thick with everything we weren't saying. Then he walked away, his footsteps sharp on the tile floor. I stayed in that hallway for a minute longer, my heart pounding. Something had broken between us that couldn't be fixed. And honestly, I didn't want to fix it. The word started appearing everywhere about a week later. Review. Audit. Assessment. It floated through meetings and emails like smoke, never quite solid but definitely there. Leadership was reviewing departmental processes. There would be an assessment of recent projects. They were conducting a comprehensive audit of Q3 deliverables. My director's behavior changed noticeably. Suddenly he was all friendly concern, stopping by my desk with coffee he'd never brought before. How are you doing, Salome? I know things have been tense. Want to make sure you're okay. He invited me to lunch to clear the air. He asked my opinion in meetings like my input mattered again. He CC'd me on emails with leadership, making sure they saw my name attached to successful projects. It was obvious and desperate and way too late. He suddenly needed me again. Needed me to be loyal, to be his ally, to back him up when questions started coming. And I just kept doing my job, politely declining his lunch invitations, responding professionally to his sudden friendliness. Then HR requested something specific. Timeline. From me. The email landed in my inbox on a Tuesday morning. Salome, as part of our standard process review, could you provide a timeline of your involvement in the Q2 and Q3 reporting cycles? Include key milestones, data sources used, and any communication regarding methodology changes. It was phrased carefully, bureaucratically. Standard process review. But I'd been in corporate long enough to read between the lines. This wasn't about me. They weren't investigating my work. They were building a case. Using my documentation to understand what had really happened. To see the gap between what my director reported and what had actually occurred. I realized they'd probably already talked to others. They were collecting pieces, putting together a picture. And I was being asked to fill in the details. Not my opinions. Not my accusations. Just facts. What happened when? I started pulling together the timeline that night, working through old emails and project files. Being precise. Being thorough. Being exactly what they asked for. I provided facts. Emails. Every piece of documentation they requested. Organized chronologically. Nothing extra. No commentary about what I thought it meant or what I believed had happened. Just the objective record. Projects started on this date. Data pulled from these sources. Reports submitted with these figures. Original data showed different figures. No editorializing. No drama. Just the truth, laid out in a simple timeline that anyone could follow. I attached the relevant email chains, The ones where my director had asked me to polish reports or adjust the presentation of findings. The ones where I'd asked for clarification and he'd suddenly gone silent or vague. Everything was there in his own words. I sent it to HR on a Friday afternoon. The automated response confirmed receipt. Then silence. HR went completely quiet. No follow-up questions. No requests for additional information. No acknowledgement beyond that automatic reply. It was like my email had disappeared into a black hole. But I knew better. Silence like that meant something big. It meant lawyers were reviewing everything. It meant serious conversations were happening behind closed doors. It meant the wheels were turning, slowly but inevitably. The cracks started showing everywhere after that. My director missed meetings he'd normally never skip. Important ones with clients and leadership. His calendar, usually packed and color-coded with military precision, developed gaps. Whole mornings blocked off with vague labels like external meeting or off-site work. He started delegating things he'd never delegated before. Critical decisions, client relationships, budget approvals. Anything that required his signature suddenly got pushed down to Kyle, who looked increasingly overwhelmed and confused. "Do you know what's going on?" Kyle asked me one afternoon, genuine concern in his voice. Shrugged. "Above my pay grade," I said, which was technically true. Then security badges got updated. We all got new ones, part of a routine security refresh, according to the email. But I noticed something odd. My access levels had quietly expanded. I could now see files and systems I'd never been able to access before. Areas that were previously restricted to directors and above. Either someone made a mistake or someone was making sure I had visibility into things I'd need access to soon. I didn't ask. I just noted it. And waited. He didn't show up one morning. Thursday. Late October. I noticed because I arrived at the usual time and his office was dark. No laptop on the desk. No coffee cup. No jacket on the back of his chair. His calendar was completely empty when I checked. Everything wiped clean like he'd never existed in the schedule. Kyle looked worried. Others started whispering. By mid-morning the speculation was everywhere. Is he sick? Did something happen? Maybe he's working from home. But nobody had gotten any messages from him. No emails. No chat status showing active. Nothing. His office stayed dark all day. And the next day. And the day after that. People stopped asking questions out loud, but the tension was thick. Everyone could feel that something had shifted. That empty office was like a hole in the fabric of our normal routine. Kept working, watching, waiting. Security badges got updated again. This time his name was removed from several access lists. I only noticed because I happened to be looking. I saw him being escorted out the following Tuesday morning. I'd just gotten off the elevator, still holding my coffee, when I spotted them. 2 people from corporate security, one on each side, walking him through the lobby. No announcement. No explanation. No big dramatic scene. Just quiet and efficient, the way these things are done when companies want to avoid spectacle. He wasn't in handcuffs or anything. He was carrying a small box, the kind they give you for personal items. His face was blank. Carefully neutral. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself rigid. Our eyes met for just a second as they passed. I didn't look away. Didn't smile. Didn't gloat. Just watched. He broke eye contact first, staring straight ahead as they guided him toward the exit. People around me had stopped, frozen in place, watching this corporate death march. The elevator doors closed behind me. My phone buzzed. Message from HR. Salome, leadership would like to meet with you this afternoon at 2 p.m. Conference room C. They told me my promotion had been blocked without cause. Not insufficient experience, or not quite ready, or any of the corporate euphemisms my director had used. Just blocked. No legitimate reason. The VP of operations sat across from me, along with someone from HR I'd never met before. Senior level. We've completed our review of departmental operations, she said. Your performance records are exemplary. Your contributions have been consistently undervalued. They laid it out clearly. My director had blocked my promotion while simultaneously taking credit for my work. He'd manipulated reporting to make his performance look better than it was. He'd created a pattern of misrepresentation that violated company policy and damaged credibility with clients. It wasn't just about me. It was bigger than that. But my documentation had been the thread that unraveled everything. They asked what I wanted to do next. Not what they were offering me. What I wanted. It was the first time in 4 years anyone in leadership had asked me that question. I sat there for a moment processing. Then I told them exactly what role I wanted and what I'd need to be successful in it. I stepped into the role the following Monday. Not as a promotion. As a lateral move with expanded responsibilities and authority that matched what I'd actually been doing all along. No waiting period. No probation. No evaluation period. Just immediate placement. The senior analyst position I should have gotten months ago. Plus project oversight. Plus direct access to leadership. Plus the salary that should have been mine already. They didn't make a big announcement. Just updated the org chart and sent a brief email about leadership changes. My name where my directors had been. Kyle reported to me now, which was awkward for about 2 days until we figured out how to work together. He was relieved, honestly. He'd been drowning. I passed my old director's office every day on the way to my new one. They'd already cleared it out. Fresh paint smell. New furniture coming in. Like he'd never been there. His name removed from the door, the wall directory, the email signatures. Erased. Sometimes I'd pause there for just a second, remembering. Then I'd keep walking. He never contacted me. Not an email. Not a message. Not even a LinkedIn connection request. Just silence. Disappeared completely from the company. From the industry circles we'd both traveled in, from professional existence. I never mentioned his name. Not in meetings when people asked what happened. Not in conversations when colleagues wanted to gossip. I just say there'd been a leadership change and redirect to the work ahead. 'Cause here's what I learned. I didn't win by fighting back. I didn't win by making accusations or sending angry emails or confronting him in front of everyone. I won by standing still and letting the truth move forward without interference. When he asked me to help him cover his tracks, I just asked for clarity. When leadership asked for data, I just sent the files. When HR requested a timeline, I just provided facts. No drama. No weapons. Just documentation. Just accuracy. Just refusing to participate in the lie. When someone underestimates your silence, they forget it's usually where the receipts live. And my receipts were impeccable.